maybe 20, 30 years. But to kind of add to the complication, with like Muhammad and Moses, they were also basically statesmen. And so many other things, required their attention. Whereas the Buddha, had 45 years. So anyway, so his extemporaneous teachings, and so we looked at, right, how those words became first oral text, then written text, and then scriptures, and then the notion and the weight of scriptures. I try to emphasize, that there's both plus and minuses. Some things are gained and some things are lost. When you go from these extemporaneous words addressed to particular individuals and sometimes to a group, and then turn into scripture. Right? And I think from that perspective, we could also extend that analysis to how scriptures come about in other spiritual religious traditions. I think they all began as words said as necessary to fit the person, to fit the occasion. Right? So anyway, we looked at that, and then we looked at the Four Noble Truths as the core of the Dharma that the Buddha taught. So I said that everything else in Buddhism, all the other developments that happen over time, in a way, Buddhists will say that they are all many different ways of restating the Four Noble Truths, elaborating on the Four Noble Truths, translating the Four Noble Truths across time and space. Now, as a footnote to last week, you should not, on the other hand, having said all of that about the Four Noble Truths, you should not be too surprised if you meet Buddhists who may not know what the Four Noble Truths are. In the same way that I think a Christian might have a vague idea, or many Christians might have a vague idea of the dogma of the Trinity, but can't quite, tell you what exactly, how exactly the Trinity works. But even more maybe surprising, you might even run into Buddhists, especially Buddhists in East Asia, like say in Japan, that may not even have heard of Four Noble Truths. So don't be surprised. Now, this is not to say that the Four Noble Truths isn't, the basis of what they are practicing. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that it may not be explicitly stated, like, oh, we as Buddhists, we believe in the Four Noble Truths. Yeah. It's just that in the West, almost always when you start talking about Buddhism, you begin with the Four Noble Truths. And there is, again, even within this story, there is a particular story to be told about why in the West, when people want to know about Buddhism, people like me would say, let me tell you about the Four Noble Truths. So even this choice, this decision, there is a story there. Yeah? But we don't have time, to talk about that. Yeah? But actually, if we look at that story, it tells us a lot about, not necessarily Buddhism, it tells us a lot about us. So when I was in college, I remember something that one of my history professors said, specifically the Chinese history professor. I regret now because I didn't really pay attention to who said this, but she said there is a famous Chinese historian that says that the study of history is not the study of the past. This historian says the study of history is the study of how each generation looks at its past, imagines its past, interprets its past, and then generate stories about its past. In the same way, I think we can spend time talking about why we start with the Four Noble Truths. So that you should know, that you should, I think, understand and appreciate, and not be so shocked. Like if you meet Buddhists who say, "Oh, Four Noble Truths, I think it is this, or that, or So anyway, so we covered the Four Noble Truths, and all these lectures are available on YouTube. And so if you have not formally signed up for this course, do sign up. It doesn't cost you anything, although a link might come up and say, here's an opportunity to support us financially, but not required. And what you get from there is that when we send out these links, and say, here is the link to the playlist on this YouTube channel, where you can go back and listen to these past classes in case you have missed. Today what we want to talk about is the Sangha. So as many of you probably know, it is said that the definition of a Buddhist, and again this particular definition comes from a particular tradition, which is Indian Buddhism, late Indian Buddhism in the north. And then you have Indian Buddhism in the south, so on and so forth. But late Indian Buddhism in the north, in this great Buddhist university called Nalanda. In the Nalanda University system, they say the definition of a Buddhist is anyone who takes refuge in the Buddha, takes refuge in the Dharma, and takes refuge in the Sangha. So in part, this course, very loosely, have covered Buddha. So we looked at, the development, we looked at the historical Buddha, the person that most Buddhists would point to and say, that's the Buddha. There are some Buddhists who said that Buddha is not as great as some other Buddha that came later. So even that is kind of up in the air, So there are some Japanese Buddhists who said that the real Buddha appeared in Japan later on, kind of relegating the Indian Buddha as almost like a John the Baptist figure that, came before the real thing came. Then there are some Himalayan Buddhists, that will say, the Buddha of the past, present, and future is this other guy. Anyway, we looked at the historical basis for this idea of a Buddha, of an awakened one, and how that idea then, began to develop and grew over time, so that now you have the possibilities of Buddhas in more than one place, associated with more than one figure. So we looked at Buddha. Last week, we looked more directly at Dharma, the content of the Dharma. The week before, we looked at the container for the Dharma, the development of scriptures, of texts, so on and so forth, and traditions. So today now we want to look at the third of these three refuges, or sometimes called the three jewels, the three precious ones, which is Sangha. And as always, we are going to begin with, maybe a little boring to some of you, but as I said right from the beginning, I am a, history geek. I like history. I like looking at, the past and how to imagine or reimagine the past. So we're going to begin with what we more or less know about the early Buddhist community. So that's where we're going to go now. So let's attempt sharing screen, Keynote, share, and see if it works. Then we want to do this. There is something else I think that can be done. I think we go here, we go play, we go view, we go full screen. Uh-oh. Okay. So the general outline is we'll look at the formation of the early Buddhist community. We'll look at the details of this community, so-called monastic matters. And then we're going to look at the relationship between the monastic and the lay community or the householders. So these are the three general areas that we're going to look at. Go away. Go away. Okay. So when Siddhartha achieved this state called Buddha, as you remember, the first thing he did in terms of looking for an audience was to go seek out these 5 companions that he had, that his father sent to try to persuade him to go back to the palace, but instead they joined him in the forest. But at some point, when they thought that he had given up the spiritual path because he kind of slacked, then they left him, abandoned him, but he went to them. And there, as we know, he taught them the 4 Noble Truths in that very first teaching called the turning of the wheel of Dharma. That happened at Deer Park, in this place in India called Deer Park, which is right outside of Varanasi. Varanasi or Benares being the most important and holy city in India. Today, if you go to Deer Park, there are still some deer walking around, and there's a big stupa there to commemorate the Buddha's teaching there at Deer Park. And just to point out, this mural here in our temple is inspired by Deer Park. So it's a dreamy deer park. That's why the deer is in the background there. So he goes to these 5. They listen to his teachings, and it is said that at the end of that teaching, they too experience an awakening. But if I remember correctly, it wasn't until the second teaching that he gave them that they became free as well, became a Buddha of sorts. There's some division. They were called those who heard the Buddhas, the hearer Buddhas, the Shravakas. But anyway, at the end of that first teaching, we were told that these 5 said, we want to join you. And all he said was like, yes, come monks, And just like that, they became part of this first assembly, this first community. So the word Sangha is literally, you could translate as community. But in the Buddha's time, the word Sangha, interestingly, according to historians, it wasn't used so much in the religious context. Remember that during the Buddha's time, there were already a lot of different group of religious figures, ascetics, or renouncer, right? The next line, part of the Indic renouncer tradition. These are people who have left their families, checked out, gone into the forest, given up the householder life. They've gone forth from a life of living at home with family and responsibilities of that sort into the homeless state by choice. for spiritual reasons. So these are known as the Shramanas or the Sannyasins, which we talked about way back in the first lecture, to kind of the broader context of what the Buddha did. But these groups didn't, apparently these groups didn't call their community Sangha. So that Siddhartha chose the word Sangha is somewhat interesting. Who used this word Sangha during the Buddha's time? They were used by guilds, professional guilds. So blacksmith, a business guild. So it's like a club of common profession. So a rather, you would say, mundane word that the Buddha chose to call his group, his band of guys. At this point, still just guys. So his band of guys, he called them the Sangha, the guild. So there is some connotation of like, we are a group that are training a particular skill to be good at it, to be good at this skill, and the way these guilds are formed, it's entirely voluntary. So there's no compulsion. And how long you stay, also entirely voluntary. Yes, so there is something about why I think that he chose this expression, Sangha, which at that time did not carry the weight of like, religion, forever. So that we should take note, yeah? And the Buddha would refer to these monks as bhikshu. Eventually, when women were admitted into this order, they were known as bhikshunis, bhikshus and bhikshunis. So these are individuals who are now living a life of having gone forth. Gone forth again from the home life into a voluntary homeless life. So this group of bhikshus, the inner attitude that they are to have is renunciation of the household life on the one hand, and dependence on the generosity of householders. So it's an interesting dynamic that the Buddha chose for his community, because there were plenty of other renouncer communities that actually advocated renunciation of household life and complete cut-off from ordinary society. And these would go into the forest, almost never to be seen again. And they form their own communities and wandering around and not so dependent on the rest of society. But the Buddha chose a community that is in the world but not of the world, as we would say. They renounce household life, but now their existence is dependent on the generosity of householders. So an interesting kind of dynamic is intended there in this kind of lifestyle. So in fact, the Buddha prohibited them from completely kind of independent. So he, it's happening again. I don't know how that happens. Somebody is drawing on. Uh-oh. Do you know what we did last time to solve this problem of... yeah, okay, so... And then we have to prevent everyone from monkeying around. People, stop monkeying around. I guess that's the extent of my technology. Yes. Stop monkeying around. Don't touch the screen, you all. Yeah. So that's the inner attitude, and then there's the outer signifiers, and the outer signifiers is shave head. And again, that's not a given, because there were a lot of renouncer traditions that advocated keeping hair, and in fact letting hair grow and pile them up and roll them up, you know. But in his community is to shave off hair. Yes? I mean, why not, right? It's a mark of difference. Yeah, so your difference could be to grow your hair and never cut it, or cut off your hair and never grow it. And there is there were other communities who also would not have hair, but they took more extreme forms of getting rid of the hair. So the Jains, an older tradition, like the founder of Jainism was an older contemporary of the Buddha, and the Jain religion continues to this day. They would pluck out each hair. Yeah. And the Buddha wasn't interested in that. In fact, I would make the argument that the Buddha really saw no benefit in inflicting pain at all. In fact, even the meditation that he taught, he encouraged finding ways to experience joy and pleasure, of course not the kind of joy and pleasure that is anchored on sensory experiences. Then on the basis of discovering what he would describe as an innate ability to experience joy and satisfaction, and then on that basis of a pleasant mind to see clearly. That was his approach. So he wasn't into these acts of mind over matter. And in fact, again, there were other ascetics who did things that were even more extreme. So that pulling out your hair is like, that's just easy stuff, right? I remember when I was in graduate school, we would, in teaching like Introduction to Eastern Religions or something like that, one of the videos that we show for Hinduism, to show some of the ascetics to this day, some of the extreme measures that they will go to transcend the body. In those systems, then the body is seen as a trap. But the Buddha didn't advocate that kind of relationship with materiality. So I remember there was a collection of four individual ascetics in this collection in this video. You can probably still find it. There was one of them called the Rolling Saint. Saint. Yes, the Rolling Saint. So what was his spiritual practice? Rolling. Like, no, sideways rolling. Well, sometimes uphill. Because he rolled from northern India to southern India and rolled back from South India to North India. And then he had a band of students that took care of him as he rolled. Like sideways. So not this way, but sideways rolling. And that was the austerity that he practiced, a rolling saint. So anyway, shave head was one. And yes, there's probably practical reasons for that, you know. No lies. That's a good thing to have if you live in community. Because the problem with having lies is now you have to kill them, you know, and that would be very bad. So shave it off, clean. Yeah. Then robes. Wearing a particular type of robes. Originally, these robes could only be made by collecting bits of rags that is left over from funeral cremation of dead bodies. So these little pieces that is left, you would sew them all together and let that be your robes. But eventually the Buddha allowed the householders to offer robes that are not made from funeral pyre. But it seems like at the beginning, he says, use that kind, basically cloth that nobody needs anymore. Just use that, patch them all together, dye them in a color of the earth, he says. Now, how that went from the color of the earth to, like later you'll see, bright orange and all of that, and this common expression, right? Saffron robes, right? There's a lot of like newspaper reporters and everything. They've never seen saffron in their life. Really, I mean, you read these things that like saffron robed monks are protesting on the streets, and then they show a picture of like, well, that's not saffron. Do you all know what saffron is? But anyway, the Buddha said, you know, use color of the earth. Yeah? And they have a bowl, because the Buddha said you are to receive your food from wherever you live, the community there. Now, that is common. So there was a common practice already in the renouncer tradition to give food to religious figures. And another outer signifier is, of course, homelessness. So at the beginning, quite literally homelessness. But within the Buddha's lifetime, we know there were already property given to the community designated as this forest is yours. This park is now yours. You can just stay here for as long as you want. And then when you move on, you know, those belonging to your same order have access to this space. And so that's like the earliest monastery were already formed. At that point, monasteries didn't have big gathering halls or anything like that. But what they did have was little cabins for individual monks to live in. But at the beginning, it is said that for robes, you should use these rag robes from funeral pyre. For house, you should live under trees. There's four things. For food, you should beg. For medicine, okay, this is a little strange, but maybe not so strange. Fermented urine. Yeah, some Ayurvedic medical system things. So that the early community, the Buddha says, rely on these four things. Yes?
He starved himself.
In the 6 years?
Deprived himself.
At first, yes.
At first, but that didn't work. So then when he was awake.
Yes.
He developed this system.
Yes.
pattern for the Sangha.
Yes, for the Sangha.
A big leap.
In what way?
Well, I just maybe go from starving yourself to death and having all this.
Yeah, because starving himself led to nothing. So he rejected that. Yeah. Yes.
I've heard that he realized that his body and his mind didn't work as well while starving.
Yes. Yeah.
So he couldn't go as deep as he wanted.
Yes. Yeah.
that's
So he
why-
didn't see
that's
the.
why he accepted the rice.
Yes, he didn't see the point of self-mortification. That's not the answer. Yeah? And then a life of indulgence he also lived, yeah? And he didn't see the point. Yeah. Yeah. So now the Buddha is beginning to have a community, and as a community, you have to develop a communal identity. Yeah. Yes.
Going back to the origination of the Sangha, I was just wondering, you mentioned other groups, other beliefs, other people who renounced other systems. Was the Buddha the first one to admit women into the system, or were there?
Oh yeah, so the question of was the Buddha the first to admit women into these kind of religious life? Short answer is no, but we'll get to that. That's the short answer. He wasn't the first. We know that the Jains also had nuns. Yeah. Yeah, so these are the kind of the outer signifiers, and then the inner attitudes, right? And we'll learn more about those inner attitudes. Yeah? So again, in the beginning, joining this community was pretty straightforward. Basically the Buddha called and you answered, and then you joined. And in fact, it is said that at the beginning there were no explicit rules. No explicit do's and don'ts. Because at the beginning, all those who joined, they all achieve awakening. Now this is really interesting. They achieve awakening and they join the order.
In that order.
Yes. In the earliest group. But before long, all sorts of individuals join. And that is when the rules needed to be created. So at the beginning, they achieve maybe not full awakening, some degree of awakening, and then they join the order. So here we should understand that this lifestyle is not a means to an end. We might think, oh, this is a means to an end. Once you're enlightened, you can go back to corporate America. Which is the part of the way Buddhism is being packaged these days to sell. Right? You can have your cake and eat it too. You just need to be enlightened. Then you can be an enlightened, whatever. Yeah, an enlightened capitalist, like an enlightened slaver. Yes. What? Which is all of us right now. Yes. No. Yes. There's no. Once you enlighten, you don't. There's no falling back. No. Yes. So again, here, right? This lifestyle. This is it means that once you have seen things as they are, you have no interest in corporate America anymore. It's just like, that is not conducive. Or corporate India at that time. 2,500 years ago, which is the, cities were appearing and there's a lot of trade and all of that, and king, he did not go back to the kingdom and said that I'll be an enlightened ruler. No. So this lifestyle is not just a means to an end. It's also saying this is what people who have seen the truth will choose to live. So then again, we tend to think of Buddhist meditation, right, as a means to an end. Oh, now you're enlightened. You don't need to meditate anymore. Actually, a typical everyday of the Buddha, he spends many hours in meditation. Why? Because to be in the meditative state is to be awake. Yeah, so it's not a means to an end. It can be a means to an end, but when you arrive at the end, you realize that the means to an end is also the most natural way for an awakened one to live. Yeah, so in the beginning, it's simply you just join, and again, we're not at the point where the rules come yet, right? Because these are all people who have seen the truth, and some kind of deep transformation has happened, and they joined the order. And the Buddha felt no need to say, here are the do's, here are the don'ts. And so still community was small. Yeah? Now, eventually, to join this, there was a two-step process. There was first the going forth, and later on it said that, one of the requirements for going forth is you have to be old enough to scare away crows. Yes. So if you want to join the order, you have to prove that crows are afraid of you. Yeah? Then, okay. Crows are pretty vicious, yeah, tough, But in practice, it's basically around 7 years old before you can join the order. And then you cannot be ordained. You cannot receive ordination until the age of 20. Yeah, so if you join at the age of 7, then you remain a novice until you're age 20. Once you have hit the age of 20, you can do going forth and ordination all on the same day. And again, eventually, a formal system, a formal procedure of joining the order was put into place. And so, although it began first with the male community, eventually again, the Buddha also created the female order. And that is said to have come from basically, I think like after he was awake, enlightened, if I remember correctly, it said that he did not go back to his kingdom until like maybe 7 years later. And it was when he went back to his his home that the order of nuns began. Why? Because when he went home, it was basically disastrous for his kingdom. Why? Because all the men, they said, and able-bodied men all joined the monastic order. And so then, I mean, maybe not literally, but big numbers of able-bodied men joined the order. And so then, the women that were left behind, it is said that the Buddha's stepmother, the one that raised him, she was the one that led all the women that was left in their clan and followed the Buddha. So at first the Buddha did not want to start this. So it is said that they nonetheless shave off their hair, put on the robes, and just followed him. Then eventually his cousin, Ananda, intervened on behalf of the women. And basically this story is very interesting. Ananda said, Lord, they are still out there. And he said, I know. And a few times, Ananda goes, they are seeking ordination. He is like, no, no, no. Then finally Ananda goes, so Lord, are women not capable of becoming enlightened? And so then the Lord goes, no, they are. So then Ananda says, well, in that case, why can't they be ordained? Then the Buddha goes, okay. We're not exactly sure why. Of course, there are theories as to why. In part, I think some theories, or rather not me, but some theories, some people have said is that, again, although there were other ascetic orders that opened their doors to women, by and large, that wasn't done because it wasn't safe for groups of women to live alone because of the social conditions. Yeah? So that's why even when the Buddha allowed that, he created rules that from our perspective now seem to disadvantage women, but scholars would argue it's to make sure that they are always tied to the male order so that they live close by and can be protected from harm. Yeah, so such as that they have to receive instruction from the monks. So there's a number of rules that were created so that the order of nuns don't live too far from the monks, but far enough to prevent problems. Especially when the ex-husband has become a monk, or the ex-wife is right next door. So there are issues like that.
So how did that affect the population?
In his community, in his own kingdom, it's said that they died out. Very extreme. And then a neighboring king conquered his kingdom. But not, it didn't affect the others, not all the other kingdoms, decided to become monks and nuns. But in the Shakya clan, apparently. Although in Nepal today, there are descendants of the Shakya clan. So, not complete. Now, up till now, when we talk about the Buddhist community, we are essentially talking about a community of renunciates. Yeah? But slowly, we will talk about what about the lay side, what's going on that side. Okay, so up until now, if there is if you say you were Buddhist, primarily we're talking about a renouncer ascetic community. Yeah. Now each sangha is localized, defined by a specific monastic boundary called sima. So the Buddha didn't have sort of like the organization of the Catholic Church, like the whole church is under, but each area will have its own sangha of the Buddha, and they are autonomous units. So there is no hierarchy beyond people who live together. Of course, with the exception of the Buddha. Yeah, he was their teacher after all, the founder. Yeah? But beyond that, each of these sanghas, defined by a monastic boundary, so they are localized chapters and with their own centers of authority, and decisions are always made by anyone who has been in the order more than 10 years of ordination, not counting novice. From the time you receive full ordination, after 10 years, you become someone who has a complete vote. Less than 10 years, you don't get to vote. After you have put in your 10 years, then you're part of the voting quorum. Yeah? And so no single person can make a decision for a particular Sangha. Everyone who has been a monk or nun for 10 years, they vote and they decide on decisions that affect their own communities. And so authority is invested in the group rather than the individual. And so eventually in monastic procedure, this the necessity of a quorum. So it is said that for a quorum to perform a Sangha act, right, a communal act, you need at least five monks or 5 nuns who have been monks or nuns in that community and part of that community for more than 10 years. Yeah? Okay. So here are some images of course, modern day monks and nuns. This image here, over here, are Korean monks. Over here, Thai, younger Thai monks. Here are Tibetan monks, and here are Thai nuns. So these are the bowls. The shape of the bowls are fairly similar. And you can see, like in the Korean case, their underrobe is gray and the upper robe is brownish. It's kind of earth color, basically. These Thai monks are a brighter or almost orange robe. Tibetan monks, again, their underrobe is maroon burgundy, and then their upper robe is this orangey golden color. And these are typical of the shape of the bowls. Over here, up here are Chinese, Taiwanese nuns. They are not in full regalia. Full regalia is back here, yellow and red. This is the day-to-day, again, earth color, brownish. Down here are Burmese monks, and their color is quite similar to Tibetan maroon burgundy. Over here are Thai monks, but Western Thai monks living in Thailand. And then over here are nuns in Bhutan. Again, they are in full regalia, this yellow outer robe. More commonly, day to day, it's the under robe, the burgundy color. And so these are some images. So shaved head, begging bowl, robes. So monastic matters. So now we'll look at some of the rules that eventually were put in place. So these monastic precepts, at the beginning there were none. The Buddha says not necessary. In fact, his disciples will say, Lord, we should make some rules. He said, not yet, not necessary. Not yet, not necessary. Until finally, one scenario turned up, and then the Buddha said, okay, now explicit rules. And so it also signifies that at this point, right, not all that joined have some kind of significant transformation, some kind of enlightenment experience. So this story of the first rule that was explicitly stated, it pertains to a young monk, young enough monk, that joined the order after he was married, which is not uncommon. So when he came and said, I want to become a monk, so whatever the local chapter said, you need permission from your wife. So he obtained permission from his wife and released him and said, yes, now you can become a monk. So he went and he became a monk. After becoming a monk for a while, the wife who, still lived with his parents, right? So now his parents and the wife. And it didn't take long for them to go, wait a minute. Who's going to take care of us? I mean, a real concern. No social security, it's your descendants, So the mother-in-law and the father-in-law saying to the daughter-in-law, we need to get him to come back. So they went to see him and say, hey, could you come back? We need you. And he's like, no, I've become a monk. You should have asked this before I left. So they kept coming back, and they say, just one afternoon. And if it works, we will not bug you again. You need to give us grandkids, the parents. They kept bugging him. Finally, he said, okay, I'm going to come home for one afternoon, get the deed done, and then whether it works or not, you cannot bug me anymore. He went, he did that, and then word got out. Of course. Came to the attention of the Buddha, and that was when the Buddha says, okay, now the time is right. Rule number 1, if you became a monk or nun, you're not allowed to have sexual relations. Rule number 1. And so that was the very first rule. Over time, other things came up. And then more detailed rules came in, and more detailed rules came in. So that eventually, there is a collection of texts that is kept under this category called the Vinaya, which literally means to tame. So these are disciplined to tame our afflictive emotions, our mental defilements, more generally to tame. And in this collection of Vinaya, basically is divided into 2 sections. One pertains what's known as the Pratimoksha precepts, which is the precepts of training for monks and nuns, and the other pertains to monastic procedure, like how to have a hearing, if there are any complaints, if there's any accusations, how to go about, and then including how to admit someone, how to expel someone, all of that. But in the Pratimoksha section, eventually there are 227 precepts for monks in the Theravada tradition today. In the Chinese tradition and Korean, it's 250, and in the Tibetan tradition, it's 258. So there are variations of this Vinaya system. But in a way, the biggies are in the 10 precepts that novices take when they become novice. So, not to kill, not to steal, not to engage in any kind of sexual activity. 4, not to lie. 5th, not to take any intoxicants. Second one is steal. Yeah. So that's 5, right? 6, not in a particular order, but then the 6, the other 5. So these 5, just to fast forward, are also what the householders eventually, the dedicated householders would take these 5, except that the third one, it's modified to adultery instead of no sexual activity whatsoever. So, but the novices, these 5, 6, not to use perfume and ornaments. The next one is not to participate in entertainments like dancing, movies. 7. 8, not to use fancy beds. 9, not to eat afternoon. And 10, not to handle gold and silver. So these are the 10 basic precepts of the novices. Sort of like the most basic requirement of becoming a Buddhist monk or nun are these 10. Really today, for all intents and purposes, this tends to be like the main focus. But even that, there's already a lot of variations going on there. So, but these 10, and the 227, 250, 258 are all like further details and elaborating this basic 10. Yeah. Now, within these 227, they are divided into 8 degrees of seriousness. There are 4 precepts that are called the defeats. If you commit any of these 4, you are expelled. You will be expelled from the monastic order. So these 4 defeats are, first one, that first rule, sexual relations with somebody else. There are details. Sexual relations with somebody else of the opposite sex is the expulsion one. Yeah. All the other details are different degrees of seriousness. So the expulsion one is quite specific like that. Right? Then there are. Then the second one is to steal from within the community. What about stealing outside the community? Different degree of seriousness. So if you steal from within your monastic community, and then eventually there is also a monetary value. So like, stealing a sheet of paper from someone, it doesn't entail expulsion. Third, killing a human being. What about killing a dog? Different degree of seriousness. You're not immediately expelled.
Is that an order from top to bottom, or is that just,
No, any of these 4 is expulsion.
if stealing comes before killing?
No, it doesn't matter. Any of these 4 that you perform, you're expelled. And then the 4th one is making false claims about spiritual attainments. You will be expelled. Now, of course, there are hearings. So that's the monastic procedure. So these are the 4 defeats. Then there are those that are called probation. Less serious. Then what happens during probation is basically you lose all your privileges, because the privilege within this monastic community is based on seniority. So there are 13 rules under the probation. Then a number of rules if you break them, they are under forfeiture and confession. And those pertain to things that you're not supposed to have, and you have. So you have to forfeit, give it up, and then you have to publicly confess to the whole community that I have done this, and this is wrong. Then you are in good standing. Then there's a section next is only requires confession. So that doesn't pertain, things that you're not supposed to have, so you don't have to give it up. It's like behavioral. Then acknowledgement is when it's not a full confession, but you acknowledge your mistake. Then there is a section called trainings. These are like not so much like what you should not do, but what you should. Then finally there is a set that is related to how to settle disputes. So if you're not happy with something, there is a procedure of how to bring your grievances to the other monk or the other nun that you're not happy with. So there are 8 categories that divides all these 200 plus rules. Yes?
So, city could lie.
What?
City could lie.
Uh-huh.
What if a little kindergartner came up to me and said, I do this, is it good? Weird question. Uncomfortable question, I know, right? But then, I'm like, how am I supposed to not lie?
We can talk about that later. Yes. Yeah? Yes.
During the Buddha's life, is there an estimated number of monks and nuns and a geographic area? Like how many people and how many different sanghas were there?
We don't really know. Traditional sources are exaggerated. We can't trust. Yeah.
Roughly how big were these early samples? How many monks were those?
Probably not that big.
50?
I think within the Buddha's lifetime, realistically, there were a few thousand of these monks and nuns.
Per sangha?
No, not per sangha, spread out. And it's hard to say, depending on areas. Yeah.
But all of them, were all these rules imposed during the Buddha's lifetime?
According to tradition, yes. But according to historians, they say probably developed beyond the Buddha's lifetime. Yeah. Yes.
These rules still in place?
Are these rules still in place? They all know the rules. What? Sorry?
Is that a written set of rules?
Oh, yes, yes, yes. They all know the rules. Yeah. They all know the rules, How literally? I dare say, probably in Thailand, in the forest tradition, they are the most literal in keeping the 227. In fact, one of the requirements of joining the forest monastery is you have to memorize all 227. So, and they make that a priority. In the forest tradition of Thailand, they don't emphasize learning philosophy, doctrine, lecture, all of that. They're like useless. Leave that to the scholar monks in the city. Your job is to memorize the 227 and watch your mind. So they emphasize very strongly. From there, all variations. So much so that it's not even the 10 precepts. It's the 4 defeats. Watch out for those 4, and if you don't do the 4, we have you around, Yes.
Question, did the Buddhist Sangha structure influence how democratic societies were formed in any way?
Did the Buddha's monastic structure influence democratic society formation? Not that we know of. Modern democratic systems come from Greece. In fact, this system is more based on, people say, the Buddha's own kingdom, oligarchy, a rule of elders. So 10 years seniority before you get to vote. Based on that. Yeah. So when you look at these 227 rules, one scholar offered this, you can see, he says that there are 4 underlying concerns that seems to be behind all these rules. One, very clearly, a concern about the spiritual life of these individuals. So the obvious things, that you should not do because that is directly related to your spiritual life. But then some of these rules, according to this analysis, it says also shows a concern for harmonious living. If a group of people are going to live together, then you need to have a procedure, such as how is seniority determined. Seniority is determined purely and entirely based on when did you become a monk or not? Now, you might think, oh, that's kind of pedestrian. But I think, the more I think of it, many years ago when I heard about this, I can say, many years ago when I heard about this, I thought, that's just kind of like an easy, kind of like an easy, not much thought has gone into it, That's just me, But actually, it makes a lot of sense. So what this means here is seniority I'm not saying they follow it today. Okay? But if you follow this, it means in any Sangha, your standing in the Sangha is based on how long you have become a monk or not. It's not based on how well you can teach, how well it seems you can meditate, how well other people think you are spiritually developed, how learned you are. No. It's based on something that is easily quantifiable. Just look and see who got ordained first. So it includes things like, hey, the best room just opened up. Either some monk left or died. Who gets to move in? Well, the one who has been ordained the longest. You want it? No, it's a hassle to move. I'm happy where I am. Go to the next one. You want it? Yes, I want. That's it. He or she moves in. Simple. Whereas if you say, I'm more learned, I meditate better, I'm more advanced, all that, you can squabble and argue. And also, not only that, you might be inspired to become more learned, better at teaching for all the wrong reasons. Because you get privilege. No. Doesn't matter. Seniority is entirely based on, and in fact, if he became a monk 1 minute before me, he's my senior. When we walk, he walks in front of me. Doesn't matter. So everything is clear. No jealousy, minimize, not no, but minimizing all the ways in which living in community can create, And if you say, I work very hard for the community, I'm contributing, never mind. Privilege is based on seniority, that's all. Huh? So harmony of the community is really important. The rules also show third and fourth concern, which is interrelated. Dependence on householders and how the community appears to the general public. This is not about like keeping up appearances. This is more talking about if you do not have the respect of your community, you have no business being there anymore. Whether right, whether wrong, yeah? If you don't live up to a certain standard that the broader community expects of you, then you cannot expect support from the community. So the Buddha was very skillful in that sense. He says, you have to rely on them for your livelihood, even for your food. So if you follow the 227 strictly, you're not allowed to keep food overnight. Whatever you eat, you eat. Whatever is left, you cannot keep. So you don't know what your next meal is going to be, whether it's coming or not. The Buddha says, trust. Trust in what? Trust in you living a virtuous life. And that virtue has a power. That virtue would attract support. And you don't do anything else to have people support you. In fact, the Buddha actually discouraged monastics performing practical things for people. Like even becoming a doctor. He says that distracts from the real reason why people should support you. The real reason why people should support you is they feel that you are really working on overcoming your mental defilements, your afflictive emotions, that you are living a virtuous life and people support you for that. So meaning no quid pro quo, or at least the Buddha tried that. Make these rules to say, no. If people are going to support you, it's because they can see you are living a virtuous life. So now we talk about this relationship between the monastic and the householder. In the early part, it's quite clear that that in Indian context during the Buddha's time, there is a general non-exclusive willingness of lay people to support ascetics, mendicants, and Brahmins, meaning religious figures, people who have taken the religious life, and in fact, they don't even go, "What are you?" Didn't matter. So there's a general support of that sort, and particularly householders would offer food, would offer material requisites like the bowl, the robes. Offer medicine and offer housing. That not just Buddhists, but other religious groups that depend on the laity would depend on them for this. In return, monastics provide protection and fertility. You're like, what? What does that mean? Protection and fertility. First, fertility. There is good evidence from archaeological sites of ancient Buddhist monasteries. So you have that layer, right? It's the ruins of a monastery. But if you dig deeper, often there is an old burial ground, either there or in the vicinity. So part of what's going on is these land that are considered infertile because it's cemetery, dead, right? Death, and therefore also dangerous, offered to be built into monasteries. So in the broader Indian context, I'm not saying that in the Buddhist text they talk like this, but in the broader Indian context, ascetics who abstain, right, from sexuality essentially what they are doing is they are shoring up fertility. It's not flowing out, so to say. So by them living there, they are charging, they are rejuvenating the fertility of the area. So there is a direct reason for people to support individuals who take a vow of celibacy, because they are seen as powerful. They're not wasting fertility. Because in a way, right, monasticism or celibacy, I think I've said this in the past, it's, in a way, it's one of the most subversive acts that you can do, right? It's them saying to us, the very means that you use to reproduce, we reject. Yeah, we reject that. We don't participate in that. I mean, what more radical move can you take, When I was teaching college, I like to say to the kids, you want to rebel, take a vow of celibacy. Go home and tell your parents, you want to rebel against them and piss them off, tell them I've taken a vow of celibacy. Then you are real radical. The very foundations of how you reproduce your society, I now reject, right? So on that level, it makes no sense to support them. Except that this rejection is at the same time showing that these very potently fertile, individuals, their fertility is being spread out because they themselves have given up using it. So that they are like a powerhouse. Now, in fact, there were other ascetics during the Buddha's time that kind of present themselves in that way, and they might even perform rituals, right? And magic for the people who support them. The Buddha rejected that. So the Buddha was the Buddha was working with this idea of protection and power as well. Except that the Buddha says, it doesn't come from magic. It doesn't come from ritual. It doesn't come from magic. It doesn't come from sorcery. It comes from virtue. It comes from you living right. It comes from you not killing, not stealing. That itself is true power. That virtue is what is going to offer protection to others. So there's no need to do all these other things. That this is what you have to offer to others. And this is the only reason why others should support you, is that you live according to your vows. And the power of those vows is what is going to offer not just you, but everybody who supports you the protection that they need, the fertility that they need, the good luck that they need. It comes from living a virtuous life. Eventually, from the non-exclusive householder support of Buddhism, dedicated householders, they're known as upasakas and upasikas, male and female. And it's defined as people who take refuge in the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Furthermore, these are individuals who take the 5 precepts that I mentioned: not to kill, not to steal, not to commit adultery, not to lie, and not to be intoxicated. So from the early sources, we know that the Buddha's household disciples, they came from across society, royalty, Brahmins, merchants, and courtesans. Basically, women who have independent wealth, and the only way is basically sex workers. And the Buddha accepted them. So then within the Buddha's lifetime, we know that he began to talk about his community, his Sangha, as a fourfold assembly. Monks, nuns, laymen, laywomen. And we also have evidence that although it's primarily centered on monastic life, there were also references to white robe teachers. So these are like, almost like, they are not quite householders, they're not quite monks and nuns, they kind of straddle the in-between realm. That they have become kind of recognized authorities and preachers within the Buddhist community. So monastic and householder interaction is meant to be mutually supportive. And there is a contract, in a way, you can say, between the two. And originally, this contract isn't about the monastic doing anything concretely, in any tangible way, for the laity. But over time, of course, that evolved. Yes, now they perform rituals, this and that, but in the Buddha's time, the Buddha said no. And again, looking back, I think there is wisdom there. Because then, otherwise it will be like a commercial exchange. Oh, you bake bread? Here, I'll give you money for your bread. Oh, you perform rituals for me? Here, I'll give you money. But in the Buddha's time, he really wanted his monks and nuns to say, your living your vows should be the only reason that other people are touched, are impressed to support you. And they're not obligated to support you. That's the other thing. The Buddha says, the householders are not obligated to support monks and nuns. But then sometimes, we have monks and nuns saying that you have to support us, Actually, the Buddha said, no. They're not obligated. In fact, the Buddha's teachings, it says that in the Buddha's teachings about giving, the practice of generosity, the Buddha said, the only obligated giving that all of us have is to who? No. Who are you obligated to give to? Parents. The only. It says not monks, not nuns, not Buddha, nobody. Obligated. That means it's a moral failure if you don't give to your parents. Hey, young people. It's a moral failure. You are faulted. But if you don't give to monks and nuns, it's not a fault. Yes.
The tradition, did they believe that lay people could also be awake or enlightened, or is that really asking?
Can lay people be awakened and enlightened? In the early sources, it's almost like if you become enlightened, you become a monk or nun. Now, of course, over time, different notions of, whether possible or not came into play, for sure. And like I said, even in the early sources, there are hints, because we have to take into consideration that the sources that have come down to us are sources controlled by monks and nuns. Yeah, so there's that element that you have to take into consideration. And so there's a particular bias in the sources. But if you sniffed through the sources, there are early sources referencing kind of enlightened figures that are not monks and nuns. We have evidence of that. So in terms of Sangha as refuge, right? Technically, it's not like Sangha in the broad sense of the word, but it's the monastic Sangha. Because they are the ones that are primarily holding all these teachings and practices full-time, all the way from Buddha's time down to now. In fact, it's the oldest continuous institution that exists in the world today. It's the Buddhist monastic order. No other institution is as old as this, as a continuous, unbroken institution. So when we take refuge in the Sangha, we're saying we're relying on this monastic lineage. Not individuals, as a community. So much so, like again, like in Thailand, for example, when monks give like teachings and lecture in a very formal way, they actually hold up a fan to cover their face. And on the fan is the logo of the particular Sangha. So again, to de-emphasize personality cults. Like I'm teaching you as a representative of my community. So there's a lot of like wisdom, I think, in these early sources, early rules. But as, you know, Buddhism evolved and changed, you know, to meet the needs and the challenges of different places, different periods, things have changed.
Why would those nuns and monks have a mask on? That's because of COVID?
Oh yeah, that's just recent pictures. Yes.
So what you're saying is taking refuge in the Sangha is not so much finding a local community group as taking refuge in the entire lineage
Yes.
of Sangha.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Now, of course, modern interpretation. Oh, it's you and me. Yeah, of course we help each other, rely on each other. That sense of Sangha. But it's really more about that lineage of monastic that have been the main holders of these teachings from generation to generation until now. Yeah. Yes. Hmm? Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, it's to downplay really the individual. But American Buddhism has not made significant, serious efforts in encouraging monastic communities. It's a lay-led and lay community, and it's not stable. There's lots of white robe teachers. I mean, in full disclosure, I have not formally taken my vows either. You know, and my views have changed over time. I really think that, you know, we needed to have a monastic community. Doesn't have to be large. And the purpose of the monastic community is not about the monastic community. It's actually about the bigger, the broader community. When you have a monastic community that live according to these virtues, you don't need statues and images. They become the statues. What is the reason for these statues and images? Is to inspire us. Why not let, you know, living human beings inspire us? Not easy task. Yes, people will project on you. But part of the training is to work through all of that. On both sides, the lay and the monastic. The monastic have to live in a certain way that says, I'm going to be different. I cannot be like the rest of you. But it's not a judgment on the rest of you. It's simply to say, I need to show and to remind that there's another way of living. So at the core, if you ask me, now I'm breaking away from my notes, at the core of monastic life is choosing simplicity. It's not about, like rules and regulations. It's choosing simplicity. And if we can offer one thing, is to offer others the hope, maybe even the fantasy that it's possible to choose simplicity. Everywhere in this world is telling us, you'll be happier if you complicate your life. Why have one kind of fork when you can have four? For salad, for main course, for dessert. Everything is telling us, that we need to complicate our lives. Yeah, status or whatever, like everything really is to complicate our lives. And to present the complication as this is the way to go. Yeah? But the Buddhist monastic life is to remind us, no, simplicity is another way to go. Is it the only way? Maybe not. I'm not even saying that is the only way. But he gave us this way of life. And if we're inspired to live that way, we live that way for others. Speak with your actions. Yes. Yes. Buddhist monk, basically. Yeah.
But he also espoused the teachings of Jesus.
In the West.
In the West.
Yeah.
When he was here, like when in Rome.
Yeah. It's a way to reach out to, Of course, he was very open. Yes.
Would you say that he had that would be the door, like his way of breaking into, to start a Buddhist monastery here on Asheville?
Not necessarily, I think,
Well, you create a lot of competition with Jesus.
Oh, it's okay, Christianity is the main tradition in this culture, and that should continue. If it works for people, people can have that. I think the different religions don't need to compete with each other that way. The different religions need to compete with the world that tells you complicating your life is the way to go. Materialism is the way to go.
Would you also say, that I believe that Jesus did spend Buddhist monks somewhere along the lines of how because his teachings are so.
There are, speculations about Jesus studying Buddhism, but we don't have very strong evidence of that sort. There certainly are enough sources for him to draw from within his own world. Yeah, I think in the end, like love is love, compassion is compassion, kindness is kindness, like the Dalai Lama says, you don't need to cross the ocean to learn that. So in that sense, these are universal values. But of course, each tradition, each religion has a particular flavor to how that is done. So just, those of you who don't know yet, or some of you have already heard, we actually have started a project for a forest hermitage an hour from here. So here, let me see. Is this Spanish or English? Oh, this is English, okay. View. So let's see, Zoom. Wait. Why doesn't it have the full view? Oops. Okay, how do I get rid of? Okay, let me share this. Okay. Okay, what happened to Zoom?
The small picture of yourself.
Here? Uh-huh.
Yeah, double down.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, perfect.
So share. So a remote place. So the head of our order has given a name to this. It's called the Ever Excellent Forest. Oops. So here are some information here.
Does your arrow not work? Middle of
Hmm?
the little arrow in the middle gets you.
It's okay. So here, near Burnsville, north of Burnsville, about 90 acres. Yeah, so that land has already been purchased. February 11th, Bill, you want to say something about that?
You can come.
February 11th is a work day. We're going to go up and get some work done there. There's a lot of work to do. Or if you just want to come and see. So gather here what time? Is one option.
I will be here by 9 a.m. A self-governing
Caravan
caravan.
will leave here at 9 from here. So it's good to carpool. One of the things is that we don't want to trigger our neighbors either. We have to understand, like we're outsiders. And you have to earn your place, Just because you bought the land doesn't mean you are the community. So we want to be humble. So we want to have low impact, on our neighbors. Even though this land is two parts on both sides of the road, so we're not actually causing anyone, but still, I prefer that we not make such a big hoo-ha.
Christian.
We'll just lay low, basically.
Is information about this on the Urban Dharma website?
It's not. We are developing the website for this. It's done under the auspices of a different organization, but I'm basically the different organization for all intents and purposes. So it's an Urban Dharma project in that sense, but on legal, it's some other foundation. Yeah. So the Urban Dharma community would be the most immediate, both in terms of responsibility as well as access. It's right in our neighborhood. So my goal is when enough things are there that I'm moving there. I'm gonna walk the talk. Stop monkeying around. Yes.
Do you think there'll be written or formalized monastic agreements there? And would that,
What do you mean?
would that come from His Holiness?
What do you mean?
How will you agree to live out there? You would whoever else actually lives there.
Simplicity. Yeah. Of course, all these processes will be developed, you know. How people are admitted and long-term support of people who live there as full-time residents. Necessarily, the full-time residents will be a small group, but big enough so that we can follow the Buddha's, you know, rules, so that men can be on one side, women on the other side. There's enough land. And again, necessarily, this is always going to be a smaller population, and there to anchor the rest of us who might need to go there for one weekend, for 1 week, for a month. So we'll have cabins built, you know, as necessary as we have the funds to build these cabins that people can go for short-term retreats. Just an escape even, you know, from the madness, to be reminded that there's another way of living. It's not going to be a place where there is a set program, you know, you do a 3-year retreat, 7-year retreat. I'm not interested in that model. I think that has become part of like credentialing and achieving, you know. I finished this number of years. No. Let it go, let it go, let it go. Let go, let go, let go. You know. Simplify, simplify, simplify. So I imagine that when people come, like short term, whether it's 1 weekend, 1 week, you know. So there's a whole process. We can learn from other monasteries that have done that, other forest monasteries that we visited, one in Virginia. So it's like the first time you come, if we have space, you know, we say, you know, you can stay for 3 nights. And then after that, politely, okay, now you can go. Right? So then if you want to come back, you know, we say, okay, yeah, you can come for another 3 nights. If we are like, I don't know, you know. But people change, you know, right? And then after a few 3 nights, we're like, yeah, you're ready for a week, you know, here, if we have space, come for a week, come for a month, come for 2 months, you know. And then we will have communal schedule. So there's evening group practice and morning group practice, but that is only right now in my mind required of the full-time residents, the people who come on retreat. The only thing required of them is service. So a number of hours a day, there's always work to do, you know. And then eat with us together. Eat with us together. You cannot make your own food and do your own thing like that. Eating together is important. Yeah. And then working together. Practice or not, entirely up to you. Yeah. Which is also the model that a lot of Catholic monasteries and nunneries are offering these days. You can go on your private retreat. You're not required to go pray, you know, but you have to eat together with the community and you have to volunteer a few hours of work each day. Beyond that, there's the donation box. You know how much it takes to upkeep this. Do what you can. That's it. Oh yes, yes. The city center will always, well, not always, will continue as long as we have communal support. That's always the model that I you know, have envisioned, you know, even like urban Dharma. Like, if the conditions are no longer for this to exist, this can all go away. The only reason we should exist is because we have a good reason to exist. Same with this monastery. I don't want to build any exotic buildings. No, I don't want tourists to come. I don't want an Asian structure, you know. No. I don't want, you know, exotic things. Like, that's all the wrong reasons for people to come, you know. So, anyway. Yes?
So would you call it a Buddhist?
Oh, yes. It'll have a clear Buddhist identity.
You can leave that off. It's got a spiritual.
No, I think it will be Buddhist. And the patrons of this, you know, and this organization, and like the monastic, full-time monastic residents, you know, will have to be from, because again, about the harmony, you know, and I'm not good at doing, and there's a lot of spiritual communities that are already doing that. So the brand will be clear, like, you know, like the you know, like the Trappists are Trappists, you know, but you can be open to other people who need to come, you know. But in terms of the full-time residents, you need to be grounded and fed by a common source, you know. I have seen too many communities where people having different traditions, different teachers together. It's constant chaos because no common reference point, you know. It's not like mine is better than yours. It's just you need to drink from the same well if you're going to live together.
When does a person become Buddhist? I mean,
Become a Buddhist?
yeah, I mean, is there, you know, like, do you need, say, for instance?
Yeah, there is a formality called taking refuge. And from time to time we offer that here for people who want to take refuge. And then you get a name, you get, you know, there's a small ceremony that is done. Not quite a bar mitzvah, but yeah, there is some clipping, but just hair, not other types of clipping. Speaking of bar mitzvahs. Yeah, anyway, we have exceeded tonight's, because I guess I wanted this opportunity to talk about this project. We were also supposed to say a little bit about the practice of cultivating, you know, loving kindness and compassion as the practicum. The way I've envisioned this course and the way it has unfolded is a little different. But we'll catch up with that, you know, next week. But I want to point out why I chose, you know, like today also, you know, in an ideal way, if I talk about the practice of loving kindness and compassion. To me, that is also one of the core principles of Sangha. Sangha means harmony, and harmony comes from loving kindness and compassion. So there's the immediate context of, you know, like a monastic community living together. But again, at the end, it's not about just this, you know, it's how this core can emanate out and make a difference. So it sounds like we're privileging monastics. We're not. We're in fact saying, you need to feed the rest of us. You know, you need to anchor us. And the Buddhist program is never to anchor it on a person. Necessarily, he was that person when he was alive. But then when he was laying there dying, they asked, you know, who will succeed you? He says, the community, not me. I don't need to appoint someone. But necessarily, I think over time, you know, people like individuals, you know, some hero figure. I'm not criticizing that. I'm just saying we could also do our best to follow the Buddhist recommendation, which is a group will anchor the place. Where are these people coming from? I have no idea. Yeah. Legitimate question. Someone, they said, oh, has people expressed an interest to become monks and nuns? I said, I have no idea. I have no idea. Yeah, if you build it, you know. Yeah, I'm working on that. If you build it, they will come. You know?
There's a living out there about 12 miles away, you can't wait.
Yes, Venerable George, in his 70s. Turns out that he's just around the corner from us. 12 minutes away, yeah, 4 miles. Yeah, he's just around the corner from us. Yeah, and no idea that he was just around the corner. I've been to his place, but when we looked at this, did not think of it. So, feels good, feels good. So, anyway, so tonight we're going to end here. For those of you who are on Zoom, thank you for staying. I think many of you have to leave already, but for those of you who stayed, thank you. And so if you want to talk more about this project, you know, I'm one of them, and Bill is one of them, and we need a lot of help. We're already talking about the first structure to put on the land, aiming for sometime this summer to have the first structure up. An assembly space, so that we can all go out there and then walk the land, and there's a lot of trails. Yeah, and also there's a cemetery there, right in the middle of it. That's probably how we can afford that piece of land. Everybody else was like, Exactly. So when I saw this land, I was like, fantastic, there's a cemetery there, yay! It's like, don't let the seller know, don't let the realtor know, you know, these crazy Buddhists. Okay, ta-da!